The inclusion of the Americas and Oceania into the global systems of exchange expanded the world economy, and this change had a major effect on labor systems around the world. And we're going to talk about four different systems that were going on in different places. Peasant labor was increasing in Russia, India, and China. Russia, as a result of increased requirements for goods to trade on the new global market, Russia expanded into Siberia and began to export valuable furs, especially to the newly rich European market. And peasants were involved in the trapping and processing of the furs, and they were also involved in farming large tracts of land that were owned by Russia's elite class. The potato was important from Peru, and it actually became a staple of Russian diet, and peasants were very much involved in harvesting this crop. In India, hand-woven cotton products like muslin, which was a delicate cotton fabric, were produced by peasant men and women for export throughout Asia and Europe. And then in China, a large number of peasants were producing silk, which involved cultivating silkworms, extracting the silk, and then actually weaving it. And as in the classical era, we've discussed this before, these products were popular throughout Eurasia. In Africa, the practice of slavery continued, and the exportation of slaves to the Americas by Europeans and north into the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean area by Muslim Arabs intensified because of the need for labor in the new global economy. Evidence proves, our written evidence that we have proves that sugar plantations needed large amounts of laborers, and it was also a very harsh environment. Most slaves living on sugar plantations in the Caribbean and Brazil had a life expectancy of about 3 years. If you lived past that, you would just continue working. Maybe you would be sent somewhere else if you got too old or too frail to do the work that was required. I mean, it was backbreaking work. Or maybe you were sold to somebody else and taken to North America as a house slave, or, maybe sent to a cotton plantation or something. In fact, most slaves that reached North America stopped in the Caribbean first. Slaves were also transported to the Middle East, and they were servants and even members of harems in the Middle East. Slaves were also sent from Africa into the Indian Ocean islands to serve in European colonies and plantations that they had set up there. The massive loss of people out of Africa to slavery was mostly men, and it had a significant impact on African demography. The population severely declined, and the once patriarchal social structure was severely disrupted, almost to the point where it crumbled. The fact that so many men were leaving, or being taken, I should say, out of Africa definitely increased African dependency on European technology, which even, furthered this vicious cycle of repressment that we had begun with the Africans. The encomienda and mita system supplemented slavery in Latin America. The Spanish colonists used Amerindians who survived the disease pandemics for their labor needs. Under the encomienda system, the crown granted conquistadors and settlers large numbers of native laborers to work the land, or in the case of Peru, the world's largest silver mine at Potosi. The Incan mita system required its population to do public works service, and it was adapted by the Spanish to become a system of forced labor. Complaints of abuse by church and some government officials in Latin America led the crown and Spain to end these systems by the early 18th century. And one well-known advocate for the welfare of the Incan people was the monk Bartolomé de las Casas. And because of his petitioning, the forced laborers were actually paid a small salary after that. Not that it was still a great system, but it was better than what it was. And finally, indentured servitude. In the Americas, Europeans had hired indentured servants when slaves were not readily available. In the English colonies of North America, an indentured servant from England was hired by a sponsor in the colonies to work with no pay for about 7 years. An indentured servant might learn a trade as a craftsperson or as a domestic servant, but most common duty was working as an agricultural labor. Slavery existed in these colonies, but the vast majority of African slaves were sent to the Caribbean or Brazil. At the end of servitude, an indentured servant, assuming that he or she had survived, was free of obligations to his or her master. However, let me just say this. If you have been, just working on a farm for 7 to 10 years, you don't have a lot of skills, you don't have any family, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? More than likely, you're going to end up just staying on the plantation. Maybe you're a free man, but you're probably going to end up just staying where you are or finding, some sort of menial work. I mean, it's not like these people were free and they were going to go to college or something like that. thousands of people migrated from England and from Europe to the colonies in North America as indentured servants. And these people were desperate, who, maybe like the Irish and the Scottish, who were dealing with famines. They couldn't feed their families. So they sold them all into indentured servitude. And you're talking about white people, but just very poor white people from Europe being sold into this. Impressment was also very common, and this would be like when a British man of war or a British government ship would track down a ship in the ocean that they just happened to see, and they would impress any foreign sailors into duty on their ship, and there wasn't really anything they could do about it. So that's it for 4.2. Thanks.